This is a country. This is also a country. And this is, sort of a country. And this is exactly the topic of this video. Countries that have various degrees of legitimacy as countries on the world stage. But that wouldn't make a catchy title, would it? And if the title isn't catchy, how am I supposed to get my 13 views? Firstly, we need to find a way to define what countries count as countries. And now, that sounds like a simple task, but trust me, my friend, it is not as easy as it sounds. Today, it's generally agreed that a country becomes a country when it is recognized by other legitimate countries and the United Nations. And that will be the definition we will be going with for now. However, as you soon will see, this definition will face a ton of problems. To start off with, we need to go into the Korean Peninsula. Here we find two countries, North and South Korea, both of which are almost universally recognized by the rest of the world. But remember, I did say almost. That's because they actually do not recognize each other and both claim to be the sole legitimate government of the Korean Peninsula. This divide of the Koreas stemmed from decades of conflict, starting off with the Japanese occupation of Korea and ending with the Korean War, which was the first proxy conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union, with many foreign powers involved, ultimately leading to the separation of North and South. So technically, you could say neither of them are countries, in the sense that they do not have universal recognition. However, that just does not seem true. Both the countries are wildly different and are nothing alike. If you were to visit both the countries, the difference would be night and day. And not to mention the obvious fact of them being run by completely separate governments and under a completely different ideology. So maybe we need to work with a different definition of a country. Maybe we can only call something a country if it has a defined border and is completely separate from other countries, as well as being a sovereign nation state with a government. Now that sounds reasonable enough, but then we run into the Vatican City, the home of the Catholic Church. The city, which isn't really a city as the name would suggest, but a country, is completely surrounded by the city of Rome, which is a city in Italy. It, in some ways, acts just like an extension of Rome, which is furthered by the fact that there is absolutely no border control at all. Anyone in the city of Rome can just pass by the Vatican whenever they please. And there is also the fact that the Vatican City has no real citizens, as to say. As in, nobody is born a citizen of the Vatican City. Instead, the only way to obtain Vatican citizenship is to work for the church and be granted citizenship for that purpose. Now, does this mean that the Vatican is not a country? No, not really. They are very conspicuously a sovereign and independent country. That much is not really in the air for debate. However, here's where it gets even more confusing. Remember the part where I talked about a country needs to be recognized by the United Nations to be properly recognized as a country? Yeah, here's the problem. The Vatican City is not a member of the United Nations. However, the Holy See is a permanent observer state of the UN. The Holy See is like a separate entity than the Vatican, but represents the Vatican in a sense. Sort of. But look, we don't have time for this whole debacle, so let's move on. So now, what we can infer from this whole fiasco is that the definition of a country is very muddy and not easy to define. However, at least with the Vatican City, all the other countries do agree on the fact that the Vatican is a country. That much cannot be said, however, for the next country. You guessed it, it's the country from the thumbnail. It's Taiwan. Where do I even begin with this one? Okay, so prior to 1949, China used to be governed primarily by the Republic of China, which was established in 1912 after the previous government of China, which was the Qing dynasty, was overthrown. And meanwhile, the Chinese Communist Party, which was a party established in 1921, when some people realized they weren't a big fan of the whole government not being communist thing. And so, in 1927, a civil war erupted that would last continuously until 1936, when both the parties signed a truce in order to fight off the Japanese together out of China. This lasted until 1946, when the fighting picked back up, and ultimately in 1949, the Republic of China was thoroughly defeated, leading to the government retreating over to the island of Taiwan, where it still operates today as the country of Taiwan. And that leads us to the modern day, where For all intents and purposes, both the Chinese Communist Party governed mainland China, as well as Taiwan governed by the Republic of China, coexist independently. However, both the countries have chosen to adopt a one China policy, which basically states that there can only be one entity known as China, and they both affirm that the other one isn't legit. And this policy is especially important for foreign nations, as they have to make the choice of which China to recognize as actual China. And thus, today, due to a slew of geopolitical and economic reasons, most countries opt to recognize the Chinese Communist Party-led mainland China over Taiwan, and therefore not acknowledging Taiwan's existence. Though, it's important to mention, while a lot of countries officially only recognize the CCP as the only legitimate China, a lot of them only really pay lip service to the idea, usually acknowledging Taiwan's existence in some indirect way that would not provoke the CCP. And so, depending on who you happen to ask, Taiwan is either a country or not a country. Now that controversial topic is over with, time to move on to something that won't cause any controversy. Fuck. Alright, so as you can see from the image, we will be talking about Israel and Palestine. To start off, for hundreds of years, the Ottomans have ruled the location of what is now modern-day Israel and Palestine, with the Jews mainly residing in Northern America or Europe. However, in the late 19th and early 20th century, a Jewish nationalist movement known as Zionism took its roots. So, Zionism was a political ideology that sought to establish a Jewish homeland in the land called Palestine. And so, things happened, and this ideology eventually led to the mass arrival of Jewish settlers to Ottoman Palestine and later the British mandate for Palestine after the Ottoman Empire collapsed following the defeat in World War I and the British subsequently taking over the land. But the problem was, however, that there were already Arabs living there, the Palestinians, and the local Arab population were not a big fan of this whole Zionism thing, as they were afraid of being kicked out of their own homes and territory, a fear which would eventually go on to manifest itself into reality. And this eventually led to a lot of fighting between the Jews and the Arabs. So much so that after the 1947 UN resolution for the partitioning of Palestine and the subsequent declaration of independence by the State of Israel, 5 of the neighboring Arab countries decided that they were having absolutely none of that and then proceeded to invade Israel, leading to the 1948 Palestine War. So afterwards, long story short, the Israelis won, resulting in the establishment of the State of Israel and subsequently leading to the mass expulsion of more than 700,000 Palestinians from the State of Israel. And so, to cut forward a bit here, following even more fighting, later on, in 1967, the Six-Day War erupted, which saw fighting between Israel and its neighboring Arab countries, which eventually led to Israel winning and occupying both the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, which basically comprised the entirety of Palestine. And so now, after many wars and much suffering as a result of this conflict, we reach the present, where this is still an extremely controversial issue regarding autonomy, statehood, and the right to self-determination. But that's a whole other topic. What I'm here to discuss is the legitimacy of countries. And so, regarding that, we need to first start off by knowing which countries recognize which state. Now, currently, Israel is a state recognized by a large portion of the world, with notable exceptions being most Arab and Muslim countries. Though there are some exceptions like the United Arab Emirates, which following the Abraham Accords, which were spearheaded by former United States President Donald Trump, got the country to recognize Israel in an effort to normalize relations between the Arab nations and the Israelis. However, on the other side, we have Palestine. Now, Palestine is a state also interestingly recognized by a large portion of the world, the major exceptions being Western countries, i.e. Western Europe, Japan, South Korea, Canada, and of course, the United States of America, who is currently Israel's biggest ally. Though, you should keep in mind, there is currently an ongoing push for the recognition of a Palestinian state, even within the Western world, with countries like Spain pushing for the recognition of a Palestinian state, as well as a recent United Nations vote, in which most countries declared their support for the recognition of Palestine as a permanent UN member, and only then being vetoed by the United States, leading to the whole thing being dismissed. And thus, this all leads us straight to the muddy situation we face today regarding this conflict. And so, now that we reached the conclusion of this video, I hope I managed to make my point clear that geopolitics is very complicated, and even simple questions such as, is this a country? Or how many countries are there? Can lead to controversy and massive disagreement. And so, to answer the question proposed in the beginning of the video, I don't know, man, you tell me.